Hey guys, Kiwi here. In this video, I'll be breaking down and analyzing the introduction to the Whispers during Season 9 of The Walking Dead, along with explaining how Rosita and Eugene got a famous comic book story arc. With that being said, major warning of spoilers for everything in the show, up to episode 906, 908, around there, along with The Walking Dead comics, and let's jump right into this. So first off, back in the summer, we got a big tease to the Whispers in the Season 9 Comic-Con trailer, and now it's finally coming to fruition now that Rick Grimes has been written off the show. Episode 906 showed that a Walker herd pulled a U-turn and surprised Eugene and Rosita, something that was pretty much completely unheard of. They couldn't possibly fathom what the heck caused the herd to zone in on them, but they didn't have time to contemplate it, they just had to get the heck out of there. Eugene had no choice but to rush down the ladder to the infamous water tower, which I will be dedicating a video to as there's a huge moment that happens here later in the comics to kinda kick off the Whisper War, but anyways, when Eugene is rushing down the side of the water tower, he kicks the ladder down as Rosita was busy getting ready to leave. She wasn't there to hold it for him, giving him no choice but to jump and hope for the best. I don't know why he didn't hang off of the bottom bar with his hands as low as he could and then let go, or at least try and tuck and roll out of it or something, but he ends up messing up his knee pretty bad, giving him a limp. This causes Rosita and Eugene to be on the run as a herd is right behind them, and I swear they always gotta injure a character to the point that they need help standing in order to get the group down to shuffling speed so that they don't easily outrun the herd. Anyways, after unsuccessfully running from the zombies for so long, Eugene is about ready to give up and sacrifice himself, but Rosita wasn't about to let that happen. And then by the end of the episode, they're still unable to outrun the zombie herd, so they decide to slide down a muddy hill to hide. They dig themselves into the ground as much as they can to cover themselves in mud, and so as they fear for their lives, we get the iconic scene of the Whisper herd walking past them as we hear them actually speaking. This is the first time that we hear the Whispers speaking on the show, and I honestly love the way they pulled it off. This was directly ripped out of the comics, and in my opinion, they have done it justice. The next episode, we see Rosita fleeing the Whispers on her own. We keep hearing them talking, and it's just kind of psyching her out, and she eventually gets saved by Jesus and Aaron, who notice a flare that shoots in the air. They save her and bring her back to the hilltop, gathering just enough information from her to know that she left Eugene in a barn somewhere, and so they decide to go out looking for him. While Michonne and Sadiq are visiting Rosita at the hilltop, she eventually does end up waking up though, extremely distraught and worried over Eugene, just confident that Aaron, Jesus, and Daryl won't be able to handle the Whisper herd alone. Likewise, when Aaron, Jesus, and Daryl actually meet up with Eugene and find him in a barn, Eugene warns them in similar fashion, except he's acting even more frantic than Rosita as he's still out there in danger, and he's been out there overnight just completely freaked out as zombies are circling around trying to find him. Now, as I've previously said, everything involving Eugene and Rosita leading up to the Whispers attacking them in the mid-season of Season 9 is actually straight out of the comics, so I wanted to take a moment to acknowledge the original source material and compare the two and explain how the show not only did the comics justice, but they improved upon it as well. So, their situation is actually directly from the comics during a New Beginning story arc. We see it as a random side story on its own during the second issue, and we randomly cut to two soldiers named Ken and Marco patrolling on the roads, and they appear to be scouts from the jointed communities. Marco states that they're not supposed to be out as far as they currently are, and that the area hasn't been charted yet, so they don't know what's out there, but the other guy, Ken, has his eyes on a group of wild horses, so they chase after them into a forest, but they immediately run straight into a group of zombies. Ken ends up falling off of his horse due to this surprise, with the horse landing face first, eventually ending up on top of him, causing him to get stuck and hurting his leg. Marco tries helping Ken out from under the horse, and he ends up taking him up on his own horse, saying that instead of worrying about his leg, he should be more worried about how Maggie's going to feel when he tells her that he lost a horse. And at this point, they just think that they've messed up big time. At this point, they aren't really scared for their lives, they just are scared that they're gonna get in trouble, and it's not until they stop for a moment to rest and then their other horse runs off without them that they actually become pretty worried. This happens because Ken tries telling Marco to stop, but he insists that they need to keep going as they're still in uncharted territory, so they shouldn't linger. Ken's lack of strength implies that they've been out there for quite some time, as he actually faints and falls off the horse. This causes Marco to jump off at his aid, and the one remaining horse runs off. In the show, Rosita and Eugene's horses get spooked at the very beginning, but regardless of their reasons being different for being out there, both counterparts end up with two very tired people trying to escape a whisper herd and make their way back home while one has a busted leg. Now in the comics, we just kind of started following these two random soldiers as it cuts to them issue after issue trying to make their way back home. Readers started wondering what the significance of it was, as we had no clue why they were there or why we should really care. Now in the show, however, they gave us this story arc to Eugene and Rosita, who are two main characters, and that definitely helps us care about the characters and the situation they're in more, especially since we're not really confused as to why we're watching them. Now in the comics, we just had them randomly out further than they should be chasing down wild horses, but in the show they're actually given a task to do. Gabriel tells Rosita that Eugene and him were talking about setting up an amplifier to increase the distance of their communication lines, making it more possible to find any straggling survivors out there like Magna's group. So not only were we given two main characters to watch, we're given a reason for them to go out further than they normally do, which is where the Whispers are, and on top of that, they foreshadow the importance of the water tower. In the comics, they never really set up the water tower location in particular, but in the show they're actually showing us the water tower and setting up the location for it episodes before anything extremely horrible happens on the show, and they're also giving us a reason, being the amplifier, as to why our characters would go out there. Again, look out for my breakdown on the water tower for a full explanation as to why that location is even important from the comics during the beginning of the Whisper War, along with what we'll see remixed onto the show during the second half of season 9 and everything surrounding it. But back to Ken and Marco in the comics. We keep cutting back to them little by little, issue after issue, as we see them become more and more run down trying to escape the Whisper herd and get back home to safety, just like Rosita and Eugene in the show. Now, when Ken and Marco lose their second horse, Marco notices that the zombies are still hot on their tail, but he just tells Ken to keep moving. Cutting back to them after another issue, we see Ken apologizing to Marco over and over again, followed by telling him to just leave him. And this was remixed into the fact that Eugene couldn't go on any longer with his bum leg, and so he suggested sacrificing himself as a distraction while he gives Rosita time to run off for safety due to how much he cares about her. At this point, things look rough as hell for them in both counterparts. Now in the comics, it's actually raining at this point, and it was very atmospheric. It was also pretty interesting to see it starting raining at the hilltop as well, implying that it was all happening at the same time. So with the zombies right behind Ken and Marco, along with Ken constantly falling over, it gets to the point that Marco even starts dragging him. They end up falling into some sort of ditch on the side of the road, resulting in Ken seriously hurting his leg as if he wasn't already beaten up enough. This brings us to the scene that we saw of Eugene and Rosita in all the trailers and at the end of episode 906 as they hide from a horde of Whispers. This is actually a pretty popular scene in the comics, and I just simply can't do it enough justice explaining it here. Just imagining the situation that they're in is completely terrifying, and it was so confusing initially reading what appeared to be the zombies talking. Now in the comics they just had the voice bubbles and all the font all scribbly to indicate that they were whispering or talking in a zombie voice, but in the show we can obviously actually hear it all come to life. Now in the trailers they actually remixed the whisper talking to be a bit too obvious, even as far as to give them subtitles, but I'm glad that they ended up keeping it the same in all the episodes instead of making it far too obvious as well. Absolutely love it when the Whispers talk, and after the initial San Diego Comic-Con trailer last summer, it even took me 2 or 3 viewings to even fully hear the Whispers talk, as it just sounded like normal zombie moaning and groaning, and to be honest, I was too busy being worked up and freaking out over the fact that Eugene and Rosita were actually getting the Ken and Marco moment. Anyways, in the comics, it's actually Carl at the end of an issue who notices 2 guards dragging Marco into the hilltop, saying how they found him about 2 miles out collapsed on the road. They bring him to Dr. Carson, who's still alive in the comics, and as soon as Marco comes to, he starts yelling out saying that someone has to go get Ken and that he left him to die in a barn on a hill. He says that there were so many zombies, but that they didn't find them, and then he says the name of the comic book issue, "There Were Whispers and I Was Afraid." The final panel shows him rolled over and terrified that it was the dead speaking. Now, since Ken and Marco are random red shirt characters, they did whatever they wanted with them to really sell the idea that the Whispers were driving them insane, but in the show, Eugene and Rosita are pre-existing characters that we know and care about, so I guess they didn't want them to go completely insane. While Rosita was exhausted and barely awake, she told Aaron and Jesus that she left Eugene in a barn, and then when she wakes up at the hilltop with Michonne and Sadiq, she tells them that they have no idea what they're handling, and she still kinda seems rational though. She's not freaking out the way that Marco was, and Eugene on the other hand does seem a bit more creeped out, but he can still tell a straight story without screaming at them irrationally like how Marco freaked out. But then again, we'll have to wait and see how they're affected by this for the rest of the season, depending on how soon the show fully reveals all the secrets behind what the Whispers do and who they actually are and how they function. Now, in the comics, the rescue mission for Ken actually introduced the character Dante for the first time, as he was the one who brought Marco in, along with being the person who Maggie asked to go out and search for Ken. Dante is shown flirting with Maggie, and then on the road he discusses with the other soldiers about the fact that he flirts with her for fun, so as you can tell, Dante is pretty much a right-hand man supporting character for Maggie during a new beginning in the comics. Now, since Maggie isn't in the show right now, there wouldn't really be much point into introducing Dante without her, so I guess they're just completely remixing who goes out on the rescue mission for Eugene in the show. Xavier Alden has also been up for debate since the beginning of Season 8 on whether or not he's going to be a remixed counterpart for Dante in the comics, and for now I feel like he'll be our TV show version of Dante, at least until Maggie either returns on the show during seasons 10 or 11 and we get an actual Dante character, or possibly Maggie could even get her own Walking Dead movie out with Georgie, showing whatever the heck she's doing in the meantime, along with her eventually returning to the hilltop. But I digress, that's a huge conversation for another time. But in the comics, Dante is sent out with a group to find Ken, although his group seems to be less determined than he is. They search many barns and don't actually find Ken, but they do finally find his clothes in a barn, and then they're ambushed by zombies, kind of like in the show, even though they actually do find Eugene in a barn and then they're ambushed by zombies. Now, in both versions they turn out to be Whispers, but in the comics everyone dies except for Dante, who reveals the secret of what the Whispers actually are, but during this realization he gets jumped and held at gunpoint by the leader of the Whispers, Alpha, with a double-barrel shotgun. In the next issue, the confrontation between them continues a short while, but then it's implied that Dante gets kidnapped. Meanwhile, Jesus rides out to meet a soldier patrolling the road, and then after a brief conversation they end up going to search for another patrolman named Nathaniel, who apparently hasn't returned yet. The entire time they end up getting followed by a Whisper herd, and then just as they eventually decide to turn around and head back, they get jumped and pretty much everyone's killed except Jesus. We see Jesus doing some intense fighting as he fends off all of the Whispers on his own, but then he hears cries of help from an injured soldier named Darius, who is actually still alive but being attacked. Jesus rushes over to his aid, and then as he kills a zombie, another zombie yells out, "Joshua!" Jesus confusingly yells out, questioning, "They have names?" One thing leads to another, and Jesus is left with only himself, one injured and bleeding Whisper, and another injured soldier, the Darius guy. Now, in the show, we don't see some Dante guy out with a group of red shirts, or Jesus out with a group of red shirts. We have Jesus, Aaron, Daryl, and Eugene. Now, unless Rosita rushes in with a bunch of red shirts to take the fall last minute, Deus Ex Machina style, we only have have the main characters out there fending off against the Whispers, so how will they handle this throughout the rest of Season 9 as they continue to hype up the Whispers? Will any main characters die during the mid-season finale and premiere? We can see many shots of them fending off against the Whispers, which really reminds me of the soldiers fending off against the Whispers in the comics, such as Jesus and his crazy combat. Anyways, in the comics, Jesus brings back the injured soldier Darius and the injured Whisper to the hilltop and imprisons the Whisper named Lydia. This is during the Whispers into Scream's arc, which is after A New Beginning, and I believe we'll see this during the second half of Season 9, and I also believe that Henry will take over the Carl story arc when he ended up getting thrown into jail due to beating up Sophia's bullies, and this is where the Carl and Lydia story arc really kicks off, and that's why Carl is so important for the Whispers. Later down the road, the Whispers appear at the hilltop to offer Dante and Ken back for Lydia, but everything involving Carl and Lydia is another discussion for another time, as it appears that Henry will be taking over that arc from Carl, along with the whole situation with Sophia and the two bullies. So, how did you think about the adaptation of Ken and Marco into Rosita and Eugene? And did you guys like how we ended up seeing the Whisper reveal on the TV show, along with the way that they talked and everything, and the way that they're bringing up the hype? And what about the way that they remixed Ken's rescue mission into Eugene's rescue mission? It's interesting to point out the similarities and differences between the two, such as how they didn't find Ken in the barn in the comics, but then on the show they did find Eugene in the barn. And also, speaking of differences, did you enjoy the fact that they used main characters on the show, or would you have preferred for them to use minor characters and red shirts? Now, that was sure a hell of a lot to break down and analyze, but I always do enjoy discussing and breaking down the comic book story arcs that get remixed onto the show, along with any similarities and differences between the situations and characters. With all that being said, that's pretty much it for the video, guys, but I'd appreciate a like on the video if you've enjoyed anything I've said today, as it really helps me out more than you can imagine. Feel free to subscribe for more Walking Dead content in the near future. There's just so much to discuss going into the second half of Season 9, along with everything that's already happened during the first half of Season 9, both before and after the 6-year time skip. But also follow me on Twitter too, as I'm fairly active on there when I'm not posting videos. I'm always retweeting everything I can involving the Walking Dead universe, such as promos, articles, and interviews. But anyways, guys, as always, I thank you all so much for watching, and until next time, I'll talk to you guys later. Peace out!